journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. Welcome to the Humble Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Alani Bankhead, and I'm so honored today to have Mark D. Cummins here today. He's a life and leadership development coach, Maxwell certified teacher, speaker. He does all the workshops, seminars, keynotes, all the things. This guy is a total badass, you guys. Listen to this. United States Marine, pastor, Ironman, which if you've been living under a rock, we're talking 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and 26.2, so full marathon run. High school and college football coach, works with nonprofits and government agencies. He's done all of it. And I'm so excited to dig into his story today because this man is all about maximizing your life. When you're laying on your deathbed, looking back on this journey, we want you to finish strong with joy, knowing that you left it all out on the table. So Mark, welcome to the podcast. I'm so honored to have you.
Alani, it is awesome to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're just going to jump right in.
Come on.
Please tell me about your journey, because you have a lot of kind of seemingly conflicting parts of your story that all work just super beautifully. And you have 30 years of experience. Where does the story of Mark D. Cummins start, and where are you at now?
Absolutely. The journey, you look at people where they are today, but that really doesn't tell the story. We all gather when someone's going to graduate from college and clap our hands. But really, all we're recognizing on that day is what happened before. My life really is messy. Born in the 60s, my mom and dad, they weren't really sure if they even liked each other, let alone loved each other. Unfortunately, it ended in divorce. And I saw some things as a little guy that probably shouldn't see, experienced some things that you shouldn't see. And I didn't understand it then. Since going through and talking to some counselors and therapy, understanding who I am as an Enneagram 8, I learned really early in the world that I needed to make sure that things around me were in control, because everything around me was out of control and I needed some kind of peace inside. And so that began to move me towards athletics, competition, being strong, right? Creating this outward appearance. I think that's one of the reasons I was attracted to the Marine Corps. So my mom, so it's the 70s coming into the 80s. I'm what's known as a latchkey kid. Basically that term, parents divorced, mom didn't really have a career. There was no family around us. So she goes back to work. And so you send the kid home, shut the door, and stay there till I get home, that was my experience, right? And so I'm 17 years old, and this might really help all of your listeners to get a perspective of who I am. So I'm 17, and I'm really tired of people telling me what to do. I'm tired of my mom, my coaches. I worked at Perkins Pancake House. My boss, first generation owner, Chester Lipinski, straight from Poland. I'm tired of him telling me how to wash dishes. I'm going to be my own man, only. I'm my own person, right? So I saw this commercial. This guy, you said badass. In my mind, he was a badass. He had his sword out and he is fighting and slaying this dragon. At the end of that commercial, now this is before internet days, there's an 800 number that you could call. So I called the 800 number. The next day, there's a knock at our door and it's a United States Marine recruiter. And I said, I want to be one of them. And so I was 17. So my mom had to sign the waiver, but I wanted to join the Marines, Alani, because, drum roll, I was tired of people telling me what to do.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Oh, that's so good.
So I headed off at 17, I headed off to the Marine Corps, and you want to talk about a rude awakening. But to take you into the spiritual space, of all the places in the world that I could meet God, you're probably not saying, oh, I know. Here's what we'll do. Let's join the Marines so you can discover hope in Christ. Because initially in the Marine Corps, I was that normal jarhead. It was do your job, but then afterwards, I had a really good friend. His name was Jack Daniels, and we would hang out all weekend long. And then we go to the clubs. And if got lucky that night, man, life was good. And but then in Okinawa, Japan, of all places, I didn't really know what was going on, and I didn't know what a missionary was, but there was this people and they were saying, "Hey, we're going to be meeting over at the USO. You want to come there for breakfast instead of eating in the chow hall?" I'm like, "Heck yeah. You buying?" Yeah. They were witnessing. I didn't know what that meant. So I'd go and they would start talking about God, but it wasn't the religion stuff. Don't do this. Make sure you do this. Dot this I, cross this T. They talked about it in the frame of a relationship. And listen, I was into relationships. Ever since my parents split up, I was chasing relationships. That's why I was on a football team. The relationship with the guys. In the Marine Corps, relationships. Going to the club, I'm looking for relationship. And now all of a sudden, God's not this stoic, high God who looking to catch you do something bad. He actually wants to have a relationship with me. Like he's not mad at me. And so that's where I put my trust in Christ. It was in the Marine Corps. And even coming out of the Marine Corps, I never thought like I'd enter the pastor space, but that's a little bit of a background of who I am.
Oh man. Okay, there's so much in that story that I want to dig into. So we're just going to start immediately with something that you had mentioned was you had this childhood, right? And to a certain degree, everybody experiences some level of trauma in childhood.
Sure.
And we talk a lot on the podcast and in the different coaching events that we do about you're handed this kind of messy childhood and your parents do their best but your job is now to either heal it or transform it in some way if you so choose, right? And it was interesting that you focused on control, right? So it sounds like between the lines that as a child there was so much out of your control that
Yep.
as soon as you were able to get to a place of self-awareness where you had some autonomy and independence, you were like, I'm going to control whatever I can around me to prevent a certain type of outcome from occurring. And I think one of the things that's really important about these conversations is we often do these things like we know what we're doing, but there's a subconscious thought that is driving those behaviors.
Yeah.
So for you, what was the ultimate thing that your brain and your psyche were telling you? We need to control everything so that we avoid what was the pain or the thing that you were trying to create separation from?
Yeah. But probably the biggest, I wasn't safe.
Okay.
And I took that and really, I'm learning some of this. I'm learning, Alani, in my 50s when I met my Enneagram coach, Jackie Brewster. I don't know if Jackie, but wow, Jackie's really good. And she brought verbiage to what I had been feeling, even the way I had been leading, quote unquote, in the spiritual space as a pastor. I was still leading out of that wound of I needed to be safe. And let me tell you, I don't know if this will connect with your listeners, but one of the most unsafe places in the world is being a pastor. This might be too real for people. PTSD, which is for real, which we have lots of really good ministry to help our first responders and our vets. But I want you to think about something. From Barna, only 1 out of 10 pastors. So if 10 pastors start out in ministry, they love God. Oh, God, me, I want to save the world. They go to Bible college, seminary, all that kind of stuff. Those 10 guys, fast forward towards retirement, only 1 out of 10 actually retires as a pastor. Otherwise, they're going to go sell cars. They're going to go
Yeah.
work for a nonprofit, some of these other things. And so this concept of being safe. And so I had to learn, how do I control things around me so that inside I felt safe? And think about it, in going to the Marine Corps, I'm trying to create a false narrative that I'm going to be safe because I'm going to be a Marine. I'm just telling you, you can join whatever force you want. You can be in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, whatever. But I'm gonna tell you, there ain't nothing like the Marines. It's
Mhm.
not, if you're gonna be in the military, you might as well join the best or die like the rest, right? Jarheads. We're gonna climb that hill, right?
Mhm.
I was saying that, and even like some of my passion, how I can sometimes even exude too much energy. Because what am I really trying to do? I'm exuding energy and passion around me, almost like this little force field. Ooh, baby. They almost protect me. And so that's really that narrative that I didn't know coming out. I didn't know until I started doing some of the work, the inner work. Because if you would have told me even 10, 12 years ago that, or if you were to meet me, the last thing you would say about me, that guy, he doesn't feel unsafe.
Right.
He looks like
Right.
he's large in charge. But see, a lot of that stuff, it's that false narrative that you put out there for the world to see. And then the destructive piece about that, Alani, is when you put your head on the pillow at night. When I shave this mug, I really know who I am. And then
Right.
that's where all that inner conflict. And it's really difficult to be authentic and to live your full potential so that when you do take that last breath in life, that you can say that I've been all in. If you've been spending all your time, God talks about being a double-minded man is unstable in all their ways. I'm telling you, it's really easy to get double-minded with this public self and this private self, and you try to manage all that. And I can tell you at 59, turning 60 this year, I'm done with it, baby. I'm free, free at last.
Oh my goodness. I am loving this energy and just this affirmation because there's a lot of things I think you're affirming for the listeners, which first is a badass Marine with all these outwardly achievements still experiences lack of safety, inner self-doubt,
Yep,
and even coming up on 60, it's still a constant learning process, right? And so one thing, especially from a Western society standpoint, is we're perfectionists. We value the intellect over the emotion. And it's all about giving the off this appearance for a myriad of reasons. But it's funny, some clients that I engage with, they'll go through this whole growth cycle where they create awareness around these old patterns that they didn't know were dictating their behaviors. And then they'll reach out a couple years later and say, oh my gosh, I'm going through this again, right? And so then we have to engage in a conversation about life is cyclical. You're constantly going to be learning and evolving. And when you're ready to grow into that next version of yourself, old stuff's going to come up so you can go even deeper and address those root causes, right? But the
yep,
question is, do you have the courage to step into that and face the dark parts of yourself that you don't want to go to?
yep,
Right. And when you address it as putting your mug on the pillow at night, right? But ultimately, what we're coming back to is this idea of living in integrity with yourself and
yep,
who you were created to be and what your life purpose is and how you go about in life in self-actualizing that in a way that only you can define the success of and is a discovery process, right? So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And this podcast is focused on self-doubt and imposter syndrome, which you're all touching on, right? So all these elements of I doubt my ability to keep myself safe, so I have to set up a whole life and career to keep myself safe. At the same time, it's this weird chicken and egg scenario because I'm giving off vibes that I'm okay, but
yep,
really internally I'm not. And this is something I know I experienced a lot of where when I started my journey of that awareness, I was like, I need gold stars, right? I need to know that I'm okay too, but why do people not give me the affirmation that I give them? And then someone was like, because we don't think you need it. Like you're constantly giving off that impression that you're highly independent, high achiever, like you don't need that. And so having the awareness around identifying your needs is such a difficult process to engage in, but then asking for what you need is a whole next level of vulnerability and guilt and shame come up in that process. And so, a perfect segue into you mentioned relationship. And so it all comes back to relationships, whether it's relationships with your nuclear family or with yourself or with a higher power. And this element of there's been a lot of talk lately about epidemic of loneliness because we don't have these relationships in place. So if someone who's listening to this is really resonating with what you're saying, and we need to bring them back to basics. So let's say they're like, man, this Mark D. Cummins knows what he's saying, but where do I start on this journey to understanding myself and how I can put my head on the pillow and feel really good about who I am and what I did today. Where would you say someone should start on that journey? And what kinds of questions should they be asking? What kind of resources do you recommend?
Yeah. So there is a tension that we live in as human beings between, if I could use these terms, a secular space and a spiritual space, right? And then that unpacks in all kinds of discussions, creation, evolution, my agency and authority, and then God authority, his word, my will, my ways, all those kind of inner struggles. So the journey that I've been on really, I think there is a God moment. At some point, you've got to decide, who is God? Is God you, or is God someone else? Is that a higher power God that you make up? Is it the God of the Bible? For me, my journey, which I'm still on a journey, success doesn't happen in a day. It really happens daily. And anybody who thinks that you arrive, like it doesn't happen. It's still, I can still have this voice that kind of hangs out right here and can begin to just tell me the craziest, wildest of things. And I learned from John Acuff about having the need of creating soundtracks so that when those old records start spinning in my mind, telling me that I'm not enough, telling me that I don't belong in this space, tell me that I don't have what it takes, I've had to create some new soundtracks to push back, right? Even like when I was doing Ironman, one of the soundtracks I used to have, it was something like "Looking good, feeling good, you belong in Hollywood," right? I'd feel like quitting, and I'd start saying "looking good." I didn't nothing about me look good at mile marker 88, but you got to say some things to push back, right? So at some point, you've got to determine what foundation is. Okay, I do come from a space of faith. Like I really believe that there's a God. And so when I got to know him, there was a statement that said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. So you got to make it personal. Love the Lord your God, not your spouse's God, not your parents' God, not a denominational God. Flush all that down the toilet. It's worthless. It's your God. He's either your God or he's not your God. And so I made a decision to love the Lord my God, right? Coming from a place that God's not mad at me. On the contrary, he's madly in love with me. I've really flipped that script because I've shown up, and that self-doubt has been that I'm not enough. I didn't get that blessing from an earthly father, so I'm always trying to reach. And that awareness of me of, okay, if reading 10 pages in a book is good, why wouldn't 12 pages be good? Why wouldn't 15 pages be good? If doing a 3K or a 5K race is good, why not a 10K? Why not a half marathon? Why not a full marathon? Why would you stop with the full marathon? Let's do the Ironman, baby. And coming to a point where really letting God establish like my value, like really believing that I'm not the random biology of a man and a woman on a Friday night with a bottle of wine and pizza, and boom, they had a wild time on the couch. And 9 months later, here comes Mark, believing that the God of the universe actually wanted me here. He used two human beings named Ed and Vi to conceive me, but he wanted me here. So I think you got to start with, okay, who's your God? And if your God is chasing a career, then you're going to have to reconcile with that. But you've got to have some foundation. For me, my foundation is the God of the Bible and the relationship I have with him through Jesus. Then the second piece is, and this was really revolutionary for me, where it says, love your neighbor as yourself, right? And we all need to do a whole lot better of loving our neighbor thing, right? We're so divided, at least here in the West, and we find the discrepancies in each other, and Someone can be doing something fantastic and we find the one thing that they're doing wrong and we accentuate it, right? Well, I really think that's, and you got to stick with me on this because I think there's a false narrative about ourselves where love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, you have to learn to love yourself first. And I think there's a false narrative that we are already loving ourselves because of all the social media and we're taking the selfies and images that maybe we're already a little bit too narcissistic. I think if you could ever get into a room and everybody got really honest, we really don't love ourselves that much. We're trying to project a self, but really loving the person inside that we know about all of the wounds and the scars and the things that we hope nobody in the world ever finds out about us, what we looked at online last night, even though we call ourselves this or whatever the thing is, right? Because when you get centered and you can begin to say to yourself, I'm telling you, what I'm telling you right now is a daily practice as much as I breathe air. To say to myself, Mark, you're enough. Because left to myself, I don't feel enough. I don't feel like I'm enough. I feel like there is always something more. And living in the West, I think that's a narrative that you're always told. And then with all things social today, even more, you're not, what's enough, right? And then that I do belong and that I can get through this. And so when I begin to really believe that about myself and I have a centeredness, now I can begin to share that with someone else. I can let them be them. I can hold space for them because I've got plenty of space inside of me. I'm not living on the edge. I'm not living into the margin space. I'm okay. Long answer, but that's how I'm trying to practice it day by day.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is pure gold. So, first of all, defining the secular space versus the spiritual space is 100% something we talk a lot about here. So, it's funny because we've already alluded to the whole Western society, especially, likes to focus on achievement, what that looks like on the outside. And most of the people that are attracted to listening to this podcast or working with me are, I call them heart-centered world changers. So they have this big vision for something that needs to shift, whether it's as a therapist or a pastor or a human trafficking expert or whatever it might be. And so when I talk about spirituality, really breaking it down to you don't have to believe in this God, but you need to have an understanding of what your spiritual belief system looks like and having that unique relationship with that higher power so that you understand how it interacts with you. And when I engage with people that are like, I'm atheist or whatever, which is completely respect their personal opinion, but when I talk about that, sometimes we have to switch it to the term metaphysical, right? So something that you know to be true that you don't have evidence exists. And so when I talk through what evidence do you have that the soul exists, and there is none, right? Academically. And then being able to take it one step further and say, you have a vision for a solution that doesn't exist yet, but there's something in you that created that. How do you define that? So stepping that out incrementally so that you have made a decision on something that, again, that's why they call it faith. You don't have evidence, but you're making a decision that that's what you believe. And you can come back to that when things get really hard. But also, what you said about loving your neighbor as yourself, I just got goosebumps hearing you say that because this episode is going to air in February, which we're going to be talking about how you can love yourself. Because I agree 1000%. This is one of the biggest issues we have is that for years, as a fellow believer, I would see that verse. Everybody knows that verse, right? Love the
Yes.
Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And it took one day of that last little bit of as yourself was illuminated to me. And I realized that my ability to love the people I'm called to serve is directly tied to my ability to love myself. And the
Yep.
reality was that I didn't love myself. In fact, I would critique myself to hell and high waters, no problem. And then I had to go through again with that spiritual relationship, going back to God and being like, I need you to show me a different way of doing this because clearly my intellect is failing me. And then I still remember having an epiphany. So it was pre-operation. I was doing an anti-child exploitation operation, and I'm in the middle of my existential woe is me, imposter syndrome stuff happening. And God gives me the revelation of, no, I love you for you, not because of anything you can do for me.
Yeah.
And that was so revolutionary. And I know to the average listener, you're like, duh, of course you're loved. But I'm like, I don't think you understand how this rocked my
Yeah.
world, knowing that I didn't have to do anything to earn that love. Not doing one more rep wasn't going to get me more love. I had all of the love in the world, but I had divorced myself from myself. And so all of my problems were stemming from my inability to see myself the way that God sees me. And once I was able to do that, my mission grew exponentially. I had more joy, right? Even in the midst of problems, you're like, whatever, it's going to work itself out because I know who's in charge and it's not me. And I have clients who they call it effort mode, where, if they're not particularly spiritual, they come in and we dissect this process, and I'm like, okay, so things worked out. What caused it to work out? And they're like, man, I did everything I could to control it. Nothing was working. And I finally threw my hands up and said, F it. And
Yeah.
things worked. And I'm like, that's a spiritual practice. Like
I
it's
love it.
it's delineated a little bit differently. But all that to say, the core of finding a way to love yourself. And I'm curious for you what that process looked like for yourself. You have this awareness now that, oh, I'm creating a lot of the dysfunction in my own life because I don't see myself as I truly am. And so what was the first step you took in learning how to love yourself?
I, there's a lot of steps in there. I think one of the things, let's just start with some of the spiritual space. A couple big thoughts. I really think there's a lot of people who show up at quote churches on Sundays who really don't believe God. Matter of fact, I actually have more respect for some of my atheist friends who believe there is no God than people who go to church and maybe believe there is a God. That dysfunction, that has to change. That's really a part of the reason I have stayed in the role of a pastor, to absolutely royally piss off religious people. I want the people who love being Baptist, Presbyterian, Catholic, Pentecostal, the people who are in love with their denomination or the pretense of what religion looks like. I just promise you, they interact with me and they walk away like, that guy, he's an a-hole. We want nothing to do with him. We're done with that kind of guy. Because what I believe is the concept of religion, which isn't biblical. The only place that the religion is even used in the Bible says, if you want pure religion, care for orphans and widows. There you go. That's pure religion. But religion is a man made set of rules that makes you think, it gives you a false narrative that I'm okay with God. And we just got way too much religion. I actually think, Alani, that religion will send. Again, I realize not everybody embraces the whole heaven, hell, eternal life thing. But I believe that more people will go to hell because of a religion than porn, than drugs, than whatever other the sin is. Because the ultimate sin is creating a religious system that makes you think that somehow you're okay with God, that you've done whatever. See, here's the idea, Alani. And this is where a lot of religious people, church going people, get it really backwards. They think God promised fulfillment from the quantity of work for God rather than the quality of walk with God. I'm just telling you
Ooh.
right now, God don't need you or me to do anything for him. He God. You see what he's creating? Again, this goes back to why I think a lot of people who don't really believe in God don't believe in God, because people who say they believe in God, they really don't live that well. If you really believe that God created the universe, do you think he needs you to do something? Like, hello, he doesn't. What he's asking for is for you and I to trust him to go on a walk. We call that life. To go on this life walk with God and to trust him that he's got you. That he
Yeah.
like the whole Bible narrative. He's not a killjoy. God's not into wrecking the party. On the contrary, he's going to throw the greatest party ever. And I think we get it so backwards and we get it so mixed up. And that's where we begin to step in and we're trying to control it. So for me, it's become a daily walk to understand. And again, the trap, my trap, different than other people's trap, is inside the role of a pastor. Okay, if I did better for God, then more people would come on Sunday. We'd be able to build bigger buildings. I go to a pastor's conference and, the guys are, it's gathering pastors together. It's kind of like seeing dogs get together. You know how when dogs get together, they're sniffing up each other's ass to see, they're measuring everybody up.
Yeah.
Who's bigger? Who's faster? How many people come to your church? How many? Under all of that is a bunch of pile of nothing. Because I don't care the largest church right now, if you had 50,000, 80,000, how does that compare to the world's population? See, it goes back to this thing. God is looking for this faithful walk with you and me and a centeredness of who I am. Again, going back to the narrative that I believe that I've been created by God, that after I die, there's a real conversation with God. And it's between God and me. And it's not going to be about all the other kind of things and accolades and that's on a bio. It's going to be about him and me and how much did I really trust him? How much did I really believe in him? How much did I really risk in life? And I really believe until you come to the end of yourself, you never really find the beginning of God. And in the West, and I'm just like that kind of vulnerable statement to stand up and say, I don't know, but God. I'm not sure what's next. You said earlier, you're throwing your hands up as if sometimes that's some kind of failure. But if you really believe in the God narrative, then I think it's important to say, listen, he's God and I'm not. I think a great prayer, I pray it often. I think sometimes people think it's maybe too simple, but I often like to start my prayer like this. I'll say, hey, God, I'm sure glad that you're God and I'm not. Like, you know how freeing it is if you and me and all listening today just decide we're going to go through the rest of the day and not have to be God. You want to talk about letting the pressure off. So that's a part of my journey is just reminding myself that it's not always in the quantity of the work rather than just the quality of my walk. And then that begins to then blend itself in my relationship with my wife and how we interact. It's you said the month of February, and in my journey with Linda in 36 years, it's easy to get really stoked about the moments. I am all about the moments, right? You got your anniversary date, you got the Valentine's Day, you've got birthdays, holidays, big watermark moments. And I get that. And I engage in that. But if you think about it, even in your relationship, would you rather your spouse or your significant other love you consistently 365 or on those high watermark days love you a lot, but then other days show up like a fill in the blank?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that consistent step, because you're asking me how am I doing this? I have learned to value the consistent step by step by step. You got a plan, and there are marked moments where there's celebrations, but learning to be consistent throughout the process and just take that next best step. That's always going to be progress. Some days, maybe it's just inches. Other days, you're marking it in miles. But being continuous in the same direction towards that goal, when sometimes you feel like, man, it's so far out there. It's the wonder of compounding interest. Some call it the eighth wonder of the world, that when you just start at an early age and you just put a little bit away, a little bit away, a little bit, and you let that keep kind of building up, building up, building up. It always, compound interest will always be more in the end because you maximized your time rather than saying, okay, I know what I'm going to do. Wait, I'm going to retire. Oh, wait, we're going to go on vacation. Let's dump a bunch of money in. It never ever catches up with that consistent practice. It's not sexy. Everybody doesn't get all, but I'm telling you, it begins to give you a sense of inner peace as you move consistently in that same direction daily.
Oh, that is so good. I love that you use the compounding interest example because It is a tangible way. At least we have charts that show how
Yeah.
compounding interest works, right? But the idea is, to your point, you put a little bit away every day, and maybe you see marginal gains over time, but then at some point it skyrockets.
Boom.
And you're making more money while you're sleeping than you are in your day job.
Yep.
And it's magical. And that is a spiritual component, right? Even though you can see the math and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's something that you're exponentially growing, and that's out of your control because of market forces and whatnot, right? So I think it's a great analogy to what we're talking about in terms of spiritual growth as well. So taking those incremental steps in terms of learning how to love yourself starts with understanding what your spiritual belief system looks like. Why are we here? Is there a God? Who is that God? All those kinds of things. And then as you decide what that higher power looks like, engaging with it. And we could go down rabbit holes of, I have a lot, most of my clients actually, because of old religious framework, really struggle with expressing anger because they're taught you can't be angry at God. Anger is
Yeah.
not a good emotion, but like all emotions are good because they're all God created. It's just a matter of using them in a way that's healthy and appropriate at the right
Yeah.
time to save lives or express something that has gone ignored. But those incremental elements of that relationship that you're talking about not only is going to help you realign yourself, but it will create ripple effects in your other relationships that were unintended consequences. And so what you mentioned about your marriage totally resonates as someone. I'm still like, I'm about to hit the 8 year mark here, but nobody told me that marriage was kind of God's way of showing you other parts of yourself that need healing. Yeah, and so like the first time I realized that, I was like, this is not fun. This is not what I signed up for. But I am so thankful for those opportunities to have that reflected back to me through my spouse, who we've had to work hard to become a safe space for each other because of past wiring. But I do want to talk through a little bit of, because we've talked about what success looks like. There's worldly success, and then there's success as we define it once we start on this qualitative journey of living a life of impact and joy and connection. So, what does success look like for you on your terms today?
It's becoming me. I know that sounds really innocent, but like any other definition is one, subjective, and it's marked by time. My life is not marked by time. I understand I had a birth date and I'll have an end date, but I would want my life and my impact, both here on this earth and in eternity, to continue. And one of the danger getting older is you can begin to think that you've arrived, that you've learned. And now that I've learned, I know. Listen, there's a lot that I don't know yet. And so just this journey of continuing to experience life day by day, discovering who I am, learning to validate how I feel. In the success space, when you read through special forces, business, athletes, actors, there's almost no pain, no gain, work hard, this mental mindset. And I really think, Alani, sometimes we have so underplayed the emotional space. But in time, that emotional space is going to come back and demand your attention. And so you can try to cover it up, how you feel. You can try to blame it away. You can do all kinds of different things. But what I'm really learning to do is so, like, I get the mental space. I promise you, there's not a whole lot. There are humans who are probably stronger mentally, but I'm pretty strong mentally. For example, this morning I woke up. I've got a cold plunge at the house, 43 degrees. I'm totally immersing my body every single day. I'm on it. I'm in it. Mental toughness, I get it. I practice box breathing. This physical body, as far as discipline and making my body says it doesn't want to do it. I say, I don't give a what your mind, I'm going to do. Okay. So I get that space, right? But I had really discounted the emotional space. And I've really had to learn through this where I would physically, mentally, and even spiritually be very much strong, but my emotions and through your emotions, then internally, like just that fight or flight being on and that cortisol running through my body because I wasn't willing to deal with how I felt. So I have learned that because you feel it doesn't mean it defines you or it directs you. That because I feel angry doesn't mean that I'm an angry person. Because I feel alone doesn't mean that I'm alone. Now, validating your feelings doesn't have to be the complete definition of you. I've decided it's okay. I do feel this way. I feel left out. I feel marginalized. I feel angry. I feel afraid. I feel embarrassed. I'm going to validate, and Jenny Allen is really who I learned this through, is I'm going to validate how I feel. But here's the Mark Cummins piece. I'm going to value my thinking. I think they can coexist. I really feel this way. All right. I feel upset. I'll give you an example. And this is fresh. This is even a year old. This is last April. I traveled with my youngest daughter to Oceanside, California for an Ironman race. And so, right, she wanted to do a race with me. My 31-year-old daughter wants to actually go do something with me. Come on, girl, let's go. And she had lived out in Southern California, Oceanside. It's by the Marine Corps base. It was just a win-win. So we're going out, and I'm in the process. So this is less than a year ago. I'm in this learning state about me. I'm becoming aware. I think I'm becoming healthier on the inside, right? So we were traveling, and I had made all the arrangements, flight and rental car. So we get to the airport, and the guy says, "Hey, listen, I can upgrade you to this SUV and more room for the bikes and everything." Because, right, you travel with your bikes, all your gear to do an Ironman race. So I'm like, I'm I upgrade to the big SUV. The steering wheel was heated. Life's good. Like I'm the dad, man. My daughter's gonna think you're the guy, right? So we get everything loaded up and we made plans. We're driving. So we're driving and we're on I-4 and the rear tire blows out. And I don't know if you ever driven in California, but hey, cray cray. And so we get over and it's really, and now I'm embarrassed because I'm not the most mechanical guy. I'm not sure I don't even know if there is a spare tire. It's a rental, right? And a guy came and helped us make this story short. We get to the Airbnb, right? And we're trying to get the bikes together because we had to go check them in. Our whole time frame had been blown up. Blown up. We're going to be late and we're all safe. We really are. We didn't get hit on. Okay. We're in the little Airbnb. We got some food. I'm out on the little balcony and I'm putting things together. And when I say I broke down, Alani, I'm ugly crying stuff. I'm talking about snot from 2 years ago was flowing out. It's not pretty. And I look to my wife, Linda, and I say, "Hey, listen, don't let Katie come out here and see me like this." As if I'm doing something wrong. We had just a real bad traumatic moment. And here I went right back up into cover up mode. She needs to see her dad as the Marine, right? Rather than validating how I felt in that moment, that I felt crushed. I felt inadequate. I couldn't change the tire. Some guy had to come and help us and our timeline and all the different things. And to your listeners, they're like, okay, that was a problem. You guys got over it. You're great. But in that moment, it was the end. I sucked. Like, why do you breathe air? All of that stuff. And so literally, and then, oh, by the way, the next day I'm supposed to go race Ironman. And I could, I could, what I'm saying to you though is you have to just learn to lean back into that moment and not quit and say, okay, this is today and this is what I'm learning and this is how I'm feeling. And that really became a watershed moment for me about validating how I feel. It's okay. It's not going to define me and it's not going to direct me. And then I can use my thinking. I can use this brain that I've been given and I can value. There are some steps and there are some strategies and there are some best practices that I could deploy. Doesn't mean that I'm less than, doesn't mean I did anything wrong. But learning to get in that space, that's success. That's that's success. And when it comes to my relationships, do my daughters really need to go through another day thinking that I'm all that in a bag of chips? Like, really? Is that, or do they need to begin to see when life is broken and you feel broken, there is next? I watched my dad. I, I've seen this, right? And I think maybe the health that we're looking for personally and in our communities and in our tribes, and dare I say, even in our country, maybe if the posture of strength would allow a reflection of our weakness to be seen, maybe we could begin to see kind of the healing that we're all really looking for.
Ah, yes. The work that I do is centered around the verse of my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. And that's such a beautiful affirmation of, again, pivoting from the intellectual to the emotional. Part of what makes you such a powerful coach is that you are willing to show those broken parts because in that is where we connect. That's where we connect with other people, with ourselves. We're given permission to explore these really messy parts of our lives. So I heard you say success equals facing the challenges of life honestly and not masquerading and pretending things are okay. And the concept of I can have seemingly opposing thoughts, hold them at the same time, and they can both still be true, right? So I can struggle with whatever this old wound that's coming up in this moment. And I can still go back to that spiritual foundational work I did of who is God? Am I God? What is God's role in my life, right? And I can lean on those decisions I made to say, no, God says I have value. My value is not determined on my ability to change a tire, right? And that is so beautiful. And I think to your earlier point of like how freeing it is to be able to put that on God. If I'm not God, and it's incredibly liberating. The tools that we've talked about today, like surrender and trust and doing that emotional work, these are all not really intellectual tools. These are feeling tools. These are spiritual tools that maybe less, what's the word I'm looking for? Less developed people or less emotionally intelligent people view as weak tools, but these are the core of power for us, right? Surrender is not a weak position. It is a position of power at the end of the day. And the weakness is the vehicle to get there. And I just want to affirm you also as we close up that it's one thing for me to sit here and talk about weakness and grace and all these things, but to have a man who's accomplished so much come in and say this, I think is so powerful and so badly needed because men are a whole other conversation, but especially men need that affirmation that all of them matters, including their emotions and their feelings, and finding the right way to express that so that you can heal yourself, so you can be the most healed person, so that you can interact with a world that needs healing and you can allow that love to work through you and show up in other people as well. And oh my goodness, I feel like I could talk to you for a very long time about these topics, but this has been incredible and I'm so thankful for our time today. Now, are there any kind of final thoughts or takeaways that you want the listeners to leave with today?
Just your last little exchange there on success. I'm going to share this. I think for all of us, we need to sit with what I'm about to say. But success, if you want to know how to define success, it is moving from failure to failure, to failure to failure, to failure to failure, to failure to failure. That is success. This idea that success is this destination that one day you arrive to. My mentor, John Maxwell, taught me years ago. Success is not a destination, it's the journey. And you got to go on a road trip with yourself. And you got to be okay that you're not going to be perfect and there's going to be a lot of failure. And if you talk to people who quote unquote have been successful, what you will hear often is the common narrative of their story is when that failure came, they just chose not to quit. That really is only the difference. Is the opportunity to quit was there, but instead of quitting, in the book that I wrote and was published last month, Iron Parents Training Kids to Go the Distance, one of the chapters for the parents is DNF is not an option. Did not finish is just not an option. When you make this decision And this could be another whole concept. They can buy the book. But I find a lot of times when I ask parents, so why did you decide to be a parent? And they look at me like, because you understand, like the decision to become a parent is to disrupt your life forever. That's what you like. Having a kid doesn't make your marriage better. It's not going to appease the in-laws, all the other kind of things. And so you have to understand no matter what you're engaged in life, DNF is just not an option. There is always another step. That doesn't mean that you're trying to work your way, you're not trying to accomplish more. Put all the more to the side. It's just that the authentic self will believe that there is next. That's it. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. What we all need is the glimmer of hope. Whatever that is, all your listeners, whatever that space in the world, that blue water where they say, listen, somebody's got to step into this space. And maybe it hasn't happened yet. They need to keep hope alive. Because as long as they keep believing, and I know we're winding down, but you've probably seen this, but just in case one of your listeners hasn't seen this, this is one of my best practices. Is in that word believe, in the middle of that word, there's another word. And if you don't deal with that word, you'll never believe. And do you know what that word is? The
Lie?
word believe, Believe, lie. The reason most people don't believe is they haven't dealt with the lies that they're telling themselves. You got to expose the lie. And when you expose the lie, now I can believe. I can believe whatever is next. I can believe, but now I'm believing it from an authentic space, not a projected space, because I've done the work. I've dealt with that little lie that says, Alani, you're not enough. Alani, you don't belong in this space. Alani, you don't have what it takes. You expose that lie. And then who you've been created to become, the world gets to experience. And in that space, the world does become better and brighter.
Oh my gosh, what a mic drop moment. Most people don't believe because they haven't dealt with the lies they tell themselves. And once you uncover those lies and you go into those dark spaces, now you can become your truest self. And the world 100% needs that person, especially right now. So,
Hello.
oh my goodness, Mark, this has been such a treat. Thank you so much. Where can people find you?
They can check me out at all things social, Mark D. Cummins, at Mark D. Cummins, webpage markdcummins.com. To those who are in the spiritual space, I pastor Church of Hope in Ocala, Florida. So that'd be at hopeinocala.com. So we're on YouTube, all wherever you can find us.
Yes, and we will link all of that in the show notes, including his book, Iron Parents Training Kids to Go the Distance. Sounds amazing. Mark, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for your time. And guys, if you're looking for more resources, check out my life purpose exercise. If you're ready to start this journey to loving yourself on my website, mightysparrowcoaching.com. It has video prompts to help guide you. And if you want additional tools to help overcome your self-doubt and imposter syndrome, check out my book, The Least of Us, How Your Imposter Syndrome Points to Your Greatest Power. But in the meantime, humble warriors, thank you so much for joining us today on this incredible journey to discover how you can harness your self-doubt to work for you. I love you guys, and we will talk really soon. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us, How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI at mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.